This is Marianne and Gary Carlson, and we are at our show, our exhibit, at the White Bear Center for the Arts here in White Bear Lake, Minnesota.
And I can confirm that. So.
This is our show here at the White Bear Center for the Arts. We're really excited to be selected to exhibit here, even if it is January.
It's just a wonderful venue at the Ford Gallery here.
It's a beautiful space, and we're really excited about the exhibit. We've got 60-some pieces plus here in this space, and then out in the hallway we have another 20-some pieces out there. So we'll take you around and talk about our process.
I grew up in North Minneapolis in a neighborhood that was just kind of a middle-class neighborhood built up after World War II. My dad was an iron worker. His dad was an iron worker, men that worked with their hands. And but I had a mother that actually taught me how to do visual thinking. She taught me how to draw, and she motivated me. She had this painting of a Dutch scene, a round mural that she painted on her kitchen wall. And I remember at that time being a little kid taking all the other neighborhood kids to our kitchen to show, we'd open close the door to the kitchen, and they'd see this beautiful mural of a Dutch girl with windmills and all this splash of color on there. And I remember feeling so proud. And then when Mom told me that she'd teach me how to draw, then I was really hooked. When I was drawing these little salt and pepper shakers of turkeys and things of that sort, and she'd tell me about how to judge the relationship of the different parts and everything, I was hooked right away. So I've been a drawing artist all my life. Up until 2003, when I retired from Mounds View High School as an art teacher over there. So I haven't drawn for probably almost 20 years now, and this is what I've been involving myself in. It's been a continual arm wrestling match with my wife because we both collect a lot of found object parts, and sometimes she'll come out to the studio and she'll see me with a part that's something that she had been saving for one of her pieces, and she'll calmly walk over and grab it out of my sculptural plan, and she'll say, "No, I don't think so."
Well, I grew up not far from here, actually, White Bear Lake. I grew up in Mounds View, Minnesota. Mounds View had a really good art education department, and that's kind of what got me started on my path, although my mom was kind of influential as well. Went to school not far from here, River Falls. We've always kind of stayed around the area. We've been making art since we met. We now live up in north central Minnesota. We've got some land up in the St. Croix Valley area. Nice little studio there.
30 acres in the woods, and we've got a drawing painting studio.
Yeah, I'll take this.
Oh, yeah. We've got a drawing painting studio, and we've got a sculpture studio where we spend most of our time. But it's an advantage to have a partner that's a wife that's has supreme aesthetics. And I can ask her a question regarding my work, and believe me, she'll give me her unvarnished opinion, which is very valuable.
That's what we want, right? We want an unvarnished opinion.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, both Gary and I are found object assemblage sculptors, which means we collect objects that we like and compose them together to create a sculpture. A lot of people think that a collage is just a bunch of stuff, you just throw it all together and yeah, it's a collage. Anybody can do it. But the fact is that you need a lot of, you have to pay attention to the rules of composition and how things go together. And then with the found objects sculpture, for instance, this piece here, there's plastic, there's metal that's formed, so it's a void. How do you get this piece of metal to attach to that piece of metal seamlessly? You know, what is this material? It's an old, it's a steering wheel out of a vintage, I don't know, what was that?
Some kind of
Model A or something. And it's some kind of first plastic or resin. So how strong is that going to be? And, you know, you have to practice and experiment with all these materials to find out how you're going to attach things together, what kinds of glues and screws and rivets that you're going to be able to use.
These are all cold attached pieces. There's with the exception of a couple welds here and there, it's all pieces that are cold attached, rivets, screwed, bolted. We use very little glue, but sometimes we'll find something that can't be attached in any other way. But yeah, that's definitely a challenge. That's part of the whole creative problem-solving aspect of it, where you have to take all these divergent pieces of material and figure out how in the world you're going to make all these things attach and look like there's craftsmanship behind that.
Gary's work is usually a little bit larger, is stuff that is reminiscent from his childhood a lot of times, or boy stuff, you know. And my stuff, like for instance this piece over here, Storms Brewing, it started out as this tower of totem of blue porcelain, right? And as it got going, I ended up putting the teapot on at the very end. Well, then I wanted the teapot to boil over. You got to have some action going on. And then I added, all of a sudden it became about something else. So Gary suggested adding a globe. The color fit in really nicely, a little metal globe. And all of a sudden it became a social statement about global warming and how our glaciers are melting. You know, so a lot of times things don't start out the way you think they're going to. I wasn't exactly sure where this piece was going to go, but in the end, I thought it was a really successful piece. We help each other all the time with, if I'm stuck at a place, you know, Gary will come in and give his 2 cents worth, or say that's just not working, or you can't do that, how are you going to hang it? You know, so it helps, because sometimes you're busy working on a piece and you're like right in the middle of it. You have this myopic vision, and it always helps to kind of stand back and look at it, or have somebody else, fresh eyes, look at it and tell you exactly his perception. And sometimes I agree with him and sometimes I don't.
Well,
you know.
And then sometimes we'll occasionally do a collaborative piece. For instance, Madame Rue over here. This
piece was done by both of us. Part of it started with the centerpiece is a glass cast of my face that I did in college. And I hadn't really made anything out of it or used it. It was just my face. And so I started putting it together, and Gary made some suggestions, and the next thing you know, we were both working on it. I had added this bottle down here with the glass heart that I had made, and filled it with some resin, and we started talking about it, and it's like, here she is, and she's got a love potion. What do we call it? Madame Rue. We talked about calling it Love Potion number 9, And then we talked about, we don't want to give too much information. You know, want it to be a little mysterious. We want people to think about it. So.
And this one ended up, see, we never know where our works are going to end up. So they'll usually tell us about halfway through the piece what they want to be. But in this case, it was obvious that Madame Rue wanted to be a whimsical kind of a piece. So. In the process of collaboration, Mary Ann and I, that in itself becomes kind of an arm wrestling match, because we both have completely different approaches to how we work this. For me, the way that I start a work, I will find an object that I find to be fascinating, something about the substructure that I'm going to attach things to that I might find interesting. Or in this case, I picked up that old paintbrush that I had picked up somewhere and decided I wanted to make something from that. So my process becomes a very reactive, intuitive, reactive kind of a process where I'll take something and then I'll look through a pile of stuff. And believe me, we've got a pile of stuff on our property. I'll look through I go through this archaeological dig, and I'll try to find something that relates to that piece there. Maybe something involving color. And in this case, I found an old beat-up sign that we had that was pretty far gone. And I liked the fact that it had a similar color, which I knew that would tend to, the repetition of the color would tend to tie this part of the composition together with this part of the composition. Even in terms of finding these triangular shapes, I looked around through the pile of stuff, and I realized that also it fit with the triangles or the angular pieces that were shown in the old sign. So I look for things that will tie the piece together and unify it. Repetition of shapes, of colors, of textures, of spaces, of physical things that will make them all look like they play well together. All these divergent, pieces that were meant for different actual uses, functions, tools, or what have you. But I can bring them all together in a different kind of a life for people to see. Now, your process is a little different than mine. Why don't you?
Yeah, my process, it's similar but different. So Gary starts off with a couple of his favorite, inspiring pieces. And I do the same, but I usually kind of have it figured out already what I want to do with those pieces from the time that I collect them. So then I do a little sketching before I even start. This was the first wobbler. It's made to move. It will pull. Right now it's attached to the pedestal so they don't roll off. It's got a bell in it, so when you pull on it'll pull across the floor, and then it makes noise like a regular child's toy was, inspired by vintage toys. The parts, I had figured out what I wanted to do, and I had figured out what parts I was going to use, but it all started, this project, this series started with this idea that I wanted to make vintage toys, So in the process, I've started collecting these round bulbous shapes to make the bird bodies and looking for these funky little wheels to make them look vintage. They've been really delightful and fun. Most of them have found parts, but like the leaves here on this guy were made, I soldered those together to match this. And the wings here are formed out of the top of just a tin canister. So those are all cold formed, pounded, with a ball peen hammer and tools. Every now and then our pieces kind of tell us they want to be or comment on some kind of social comment. And Gary's latest piece, Clarion Whisper.
Yeah, I named it Clarion Whisper. This is a social statement concerning the insect apocalypse that's happening in our world today, and specifically about the honeybees. About halfway through this piece, I was cladding this plastic substrate head with bronze and copper, and I was having just a fun time doing this, and I had found an old 1940 beat-up sousaphone that I wanted to use for the hat, and I bought this. I think it might be a jet nose cone that I bought from a friend who got it at a flea market, and I was just kind of busy trying to make everything look like it belonged together, unify it, like I had mentioned before. And at about halfway through, it told me that it wanted to say something about what was going on in our world, and so I included the symbolism of a wasp that's in this fire hose pointed toward the ear, and this symbolism of the sleeping person here, and it was meant to be a little warning about what can happen. Here's the honeybees here that are disappearing, but what might happen to us and humanity if we don't start paying attention and don't wake up at some point. I wanted to build into the base something that looked precarious, like it was a dangerous balance or a delicate balance of what could happen. It could tip at any moment, and indeed we're heading in that direction right now. And as artists, sometimes I think we have an obligation to actually start speaking up about some things that we see as possible issues in our planet. So, Clarion Whisper. This one is called Stolen Stars. It's about what we've done to our Native Americans when we started moving west and took over their lands, and we now even use we've stolen their identities, their images, to sell paint in this case, and there's symbols all throughout this thing about our railroads intersected their land. We hunted their buffalo that they were using for sustenance. Farming has took over such a huge part. So it's about, again, just a social statement of awareness that I wanted to try to communicate. And again, it didn't tell me what it wanted to be until I was halfway through the project. Sometimes it's about memory of mood, of feelings, of emotions that I've experienced when I was a kid. If we were to walk over here and look at this piece, for instance, or that blue heron piece down there, that fishing piece, these are, I guess you could say that
they're the arcade series.
Well, it's the arcade series of memories, the flavor of memories from my childhood, from when I was just a little snipper, and my parents took me to the Minnesota State Fair for a number of years, and I remember being just transfixed on all the bright colors and the lights and the games and the things of it. It was a very wonderful, magical place for me at that time. And those memories were kind of stored away. I hadn't thought anything about them in years. And about a year or so ago, I started trying to bring some of these memories back, and they were very nebulous, not very formed memories. So I went for creating colors that, again, gave me the flavor of the memories of that moment in my life. And this is the kind of thing that I think is fascinating about artists, where they can conjure up and make these things concrete, make their feelings and their memories concrete.
Yeah, it's not a literal photograph, but it does bring up that mood and the idea that, there's something fun and playful going on here.
This is Blue Heron Arcade, and it was meant to be that same kind of a flavor of a memory and of the games that I was witnessing when I was that made such an impression on me at an early age, just like that Dutch painting on my mom's wall. This is a political statement about how broken our politics is at this time. And I did this probably 10 years ago. I was becoming frustrated with the lack of cooperation between the two parties, the lack of any kind of maybe compromise about how things should operate, so that the two trucks are going in different directions, driven by lobbyists with a ton of money that seems to be running our politics and grinding everything to a halt at this point. So sometimes the pieces that I make social statements, and sometimes they're whimsical, and sometimes they're memories and feelings, and sometimes they're really about composition, just pure, non-objective, highly abstract composition, where we try to make all the parts look so good that you can't take one piece out of the whole and not have it be as effective as it should. If you take one piece out, it doesn't work. Midnight Music Mime is pure whimsy. This is a piece that was in the Minnesota State Fair a few years back, and was a piece that I was kind of fascinated at that time with the. I guess you'd call it a steampunk kind of a feel I'm not really a steampunk artist, but I wanted to explore a little bit about what types of looks might be possible with taking parts of tubas apart and the pressure gauges and working improbable things like this moose antler in with the. Sometimes if you include, it's not only good to find similar objects, but sometimes if you find contrasting objects that represent contrasting ideas, or physically something contrasting, you can bring the viewer in and kind of manipulate their mind into trying to figure out what exactly is going on here. Now, we're doing a lot of explanation of our stuff, which we normally don't do. It's kind of ironic, because we think that if we tell the viewer too much, they're not going to explore on their own as much, and their process is probably as important as what we were intending to do. Isn't that what you would?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We want people to bring their own memories and experiences to the piece. If they have no connection with a tuba, they might see it totally different than somebody who does have a connection with the tuba. And the same with this piece too. Somebody who's not very politically involved may look at it and just kind of go, oh, it's a truck, but someone who is politically involved can kind of start to see some of the symbolism. And it doesn't mean one view is good or bad, or, it's what everybody brings to the piece. So there's no wrong when looking at art.
This piece down in the corner over here, it's made with ordinary things that when you really start to look at a rusted sign or some other ordinary objects, they turn out to be quite extraordinary. There was a photographer years ago, Minor White, who talked about how in his photography he tried to make the ordinary extraordinary and open people's eyes. And that's indeed what I tried to do as an art instructor, tried to open eyes and start people, another generation, into a path of really enjoying their lives and seeing how wonderful the world is, even in discarded objects that most people just pick up their feet and walk over or around, that there's a whole visual world out there that's worth exploring. And sometimes you can take those little individual parts and these ordinary little parts, and you can put them together to form your own narrative about what you want to say in life. And this is a pure design. It's just about composition, using ordinary things, and trying to make people look at it in a different way and really explore it. So I started off with this old Coca-Cola sign that was all rusted out, had pieces and parts, all of it. It wasn't...
You had used part of it before.
Yeah, I had used part of it on every year I make Marianne a Valentine about this time of the year. And I had used, because I liked the color and the texture, I had used part of it as a Valentine. And so it had already been cut up a little bit, and but I couldn't throw it away. I mean, it was just too fascinating look at that. It's just amazing in terms of its texture and the worn life that this is experienced. So I started with that, and I found this fender, this bicycle fender, cut that in half, and I used the other half over here, curve here, tying things together, creating energies for the eye to follow edges and to follow repeated shapes, which create a rhythm which makes your eye move through the picture. The whole idea, one of the things I do in my pieces is to try to move the viewer's eye around the piece so that it doesn't really go off the page, or the format in this case. Create a strong focal point where your eye goes to first, and then it might lead you to a spot that will take your eye around, and because of that, your eye will pick up similar shapes which will move your eye through a piece. And in this case, if your eye tends to go off, you're caught by this strong line back here, and the colors back here tend to bring you back and let your eye explore the piece in a different way.
Opening night was on the 9th. White Bear had a huge response. This place was packed. It was standing room only. And they had some live music and everything. It was really nice. They usually do that here for their artists. And we had sold a couple of pieces, which is always nice, before the show. So that was fun for us. Got to meet a lot of people. A lot of people had questions about the work. We are teaching a class, doing a co-teaching here, and it's 2.5 hours.
It's our first time teaching together. That could be interesting.
We'll be fine.
Yeah. Okay.
It's an adult class.
Can you describe a little bit about what project we're going to have our students?
Yeah, we can take you out and show you one of the pieces.
Okay.
That's an example of the technique.
Okay.
The frame of this piece is actually made out of foam core. It's kind of like a styrofoam material. Anyway, it's built up, this shape is built up, and then the centerpiece is a collage that's just laid in the inside. But what we're going to be doing is I'm going to be teaching how to do this technique. It's called repoussé, where you overlay this thin copper and then press it down onto shapes and designs that you've already put on the substrate there. So we'll be doing Valentines, essentially, but they don't have to be Valentines. You know, they could be whatever you want them to be. So this is one of the Valentines that Gary made for me.
Marianne came home and gave me a little gift one day. She said she saw these old beat-up water skis sitting out by someone's trash, and she stopped the car, pull over, stopped the car, got out and got me these skis. So, and she presented them when she came home.
That was his Valentine gift.
That was so. What I did was I took these and I cut them up in such a way to suggest a heart, and I took her gift and I made her her own gift from what she had gifted me. So a little.
You were regifted, weren't you?
I was regifted.
Exactly, which will probably happen again.
But it's nice when you can stop by, you know, the dumpster and find a gift for your hubby. And he loves it. And then that was a Valentine that I had made for Gary. And then these are my pieces. I work a little bit smaller. I also work in a more literal sense. You know, there's a picture happening of things, recognizable things. The garden kind of images down here with the bird and the sun kind of symbol. I use a lot of kind of landscape imagery in my work. Has to do probably with where we live, you know, out in the woods. So these two are Gary's, and as you can see, a much more abstract design to the composition. Again, he's got all these moving visual moving lines through his work.
There's no square format or rectangular format. The negative spaces become important in themselves.
Right. This next piece is Gary's, and this piece was made from a garden cart.
Okay, so this garden cart was, I remember my younger brother by 4 years who passed away here about 5 years ago.
Yep.
And one of my last memories of Kurt was in the fall, and he was putting sticks and leaves into this garden cart and complaining about all the work that needed to be done in the fall before winter. And my brother passed away, and I asked one of my nephews if I could have this cart. So what I did was I took a cutoff saw and I cut off the two sides of the cart, and I put them together so as to form a leaf and also suggest a heart form of my brother. And so it has it's an abstract piece that's meant to suggest a heart and a leaf and all kinds of memories that I have of my brother. So there's something behind it that, I talked about feelings and artists dealing with feelings and moods and emotions, and this one.
So what's it like to sell a piece of art that means something to you? Do you want to make sure it goes to a good home?
Oh boy, that's a good question. It's always, we just assume that if someone buys one of our pieces that they've connected with it, and on some kind of intellectual level and an emotional level, that if they're laying out money for a piece, it must speak to them in some meaningful way. And so in that respect, I can let them go a little easier. I miss them. They become like our children, wouldn't you say?
A little bit, yeah.
They become a part of you But so in the one respect, you miss them, but on the other hand, it's nice to see them go out into the world.
This piece was actually done in response to a poem written by John Graber, Graber. And we were in an exhibit at the Phipps Center for the Arts
In Hudson,
Wisconsin. And they had 15 poets and 15 artists. And this artwork was interpreting one of the poems made specifically for that exhibit. And the poem was about this beautiful, sparkling winter day. And it kind of fits into how I work. You know, I like to have that idea first. But with this particular poem, I had all kinds of visual imagery in the poem that I was able to put together here. And even though it's very abstract, it's reminiscent of that warm winter, sparkly day.
I mentioned some of the places that we find things. We've got 30 acres of property that I've got a skid steer that I had bought for a number of different purposes, but I've been digging out big boulders to make sculptural landscapes, and in the process of digging these boulders out, we're finding all kinds of old farm tools and rusted bits and pieces of interesting things because this property had been settled in the 1860s.
Right.
There's no home there anymore. I think somebody had taken a bulldozer and raised what was there, but it's all probably within a foot underground of. So we're finding all kinds of stuff that on our own property.
These leather straps were probably found on the property. Every now and then, you know, we find just plain bits and pieces of stoves and parts and just really odd metal pieces. We have no idea what they're for.
Well, and we don't have a firm grasp of farm machinery either.
No,
so,
that's true.
But, you know, sometimes we even find things that we've made and just put aside as, like in this case, this was a porcelain trout that I made when I was teaching seventh graders a long, long time ago in the Mounds View school system. And it was white, and I put it aside for decades. And then when I was making these found object sculptures, I thought, well, I could maybe paint that to look like a bronze, and I could include some other parts to make it again a social statement. And this one's entitled "Nature Bites Back." You know, we've done so many things to Mother Nature, and you know, I think that speaks for itself. There are a lot of people working in found object, and you'd think that all of their works, all of our works would look the same, but each artist brings their own background into the making of these things, and you can see a difference between the way Marianne works and the way that I work. Well, I think you can expand that out to all the artists working out there. People that are doing good work in the field, you can see a difference between their work and other people's work. And you know, it seems counterintuitive. You're just taking stuff and you're putting them together, but boy, it makes a difference about the mind that collects certain things and wants to put them together in certain ways. There's a huge difference.
Way to go, sweetie.
Thanks, honey. I think your work was more than adequate.
Wow.